I still remember the biting cold of that Siberian winter like it was yesterday. Our team, the Paranormal Investigation and Research Society, PIRS, had been tracking a series of bizarre occurrences in the remote village of Krasnoyarsk for weeks. The locals spoke of unexplained noises, disembodied voices, and an eerie feeling of being watched. We were skeptical at first, but as our equipment began to capture evidence of the paranormal activity, we knew we had to dig deeper. It was on a crisp February morning when we received a cryptic message from a local antique dealer claiming to have stumbled upon an ancient manuscript in his dusty attic. He described it as the Lektor, a mysterious text rumored to hold secrets of mysticism and the unknown. Intrigued, we decided to meet him at the dealer's location on the outskirts of town. As I stepped out of our van, the biting wind hit me like a slap in the face. The dealer, an elderly man with sunken eyes, greeted us with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He led us to his cramped workshop, where he revealed the Lektor itself, a tattered, leather-bound book adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. The dealer handed me the manuscript, his bony fingers brushing against mine as I took it. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt an inexplicable connection to the text. It was as if the Lektor had been waiting for me all along, its pages whispering secrets in a language only I could understand. We spent the next few hours poring over the manuscript's cryptic passages, our minds racing with theories and questions. But it wasn't until we began to transcribe the text that things took a dark turn. The words seemed to seep into our minds, weaving themselves into our thoughts like a web of madness. As night fell, we huddled around our equipment, listening to the howling wind outside. It was then that I heard it, a low, raspy voice whispering in my ear, quoting lines from the Lektor. I spun around, but the others seemed oblivious, their faces aglow with an otherworldly intensity. I knew then that we had stumbled upon something much bigger than ourselves, something that threatened to consume us whole. And as I looked at my teammates, I realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved. I still remember the day we arrived in Krasnoyarsk like it was yesterday. The flight from Moscow had been grueling, but the promise of a new adventure kept us fueled. As our charter plane touched down on the frozen runway, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with trepidation. We were about to embark on a journey that would take us deep into the heart of Siberia, where the unknown lurked around every corner. Our team, the Paranormal Investigation and Research Society, PIRS, had been tracking a series of bizarre occurrences in this remote village for weeks. The locals spoke of unexplained noises, disembodied voices, and an eerie feeling of being watched. We were skeptical at first, but as our equipment began to capture evidence of the paranormal activity, we knew we had to dig deeper. As I stepped off the plane, the biting cold hit me like a slap in the face. The air was crisp and clean, with a hint of wood smoke carried on the wind. Our team leader, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, greeted us with a warm smile, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She had assembled a team of experts from around the world to investigate these strange occurrences. We were greeted by our local guide, Victor, a gruff but affable man who seemed to know every inch of this unforgiving landscape. He led us to our temporary base, a converted Soviet-era bunker on the outskirts of town. The walls were adorned with faded propaganda posters, and the air was thick with dust and the smell of stale coffee. As we settled in, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. Every creak of the wooden floorboards seemed amplified. Every whisper of the wind sounded like a warning. It was as if this place was waiting for us, its secrets patiently unfolding like a dark tapestry. We spent the evening reviewing our equipment and discussing our plan of action. The next morning, we set out to explore the village, our cameras and audio recorders at the ready. Little did I know that our arrival in Krasnoyarsk would be the start of something far more sinister. The darkness outside seemed to press in on us, a physical presence that made my skin crawl. But I pushed on, driven by curiosity and a sense of adventure. For now, at least, the unknown was just a mystery waiting to be solved. I still remember the feeling of trepidation as I stepped into our makeshift laboratory. The team had spent the previous day setting up equipment, and now it was time to put it all to the test. Dr. Rodriguez gathered us around a large wooden table where the tattered manuscript lay open. She explained that we would begin by transcribing the text, using a combination of digital tools and old-fashioned pen and paper methods. I took my place at the transcription station, pencil in hand, ready to commit the words to paper. As I began to write, something strange caught my eye. The letters seemed to shift ever so slightly on the page, as if they were being rewritten by an invisible hand. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just fatigue, but when I looked again, the text had changed once more. It was then that I realized we weren't alone. Dr. Rodriguez and Victor stood behind us, their faces intent on the task at hand. But as I glanced up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, shrouded in shadows, watched from just beyond the edge of our vision. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Dr. Rodriguez turned to me, her eyes narrowing in concern. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low and urgent, but I couldn't answer. All I could do was point, my finger shaking as I gestured towards the darkness beyond our table. And then, everything went black. As I came to, I was lying on a cold, metallic table, surrounded by strange equipment and flickering fluorescent lights. Dr. Rodriguez knelt beside me, her face etched with concern. "You fainted," she said, her voice soft but firm. We didn't know what to do. Victor stood over us, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What happened?" he asked gruffly. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over me once more. Dr. Rodriguez helped me back onto the table, and we began to examine my equipment. As I looked around, I noticed something strange. Our transcription station was now set to auto-transcribe, with the words from the lector being typed out on a separate screen. It seemed that the manuscript had taken control of our equipment and was now dictating its own narrative. We spent the next few hours poring over the text, trying to unravel its secrets. But as we delved deeper into the mysteries of the lector, I began to realize that we were playing with forces beyond our understanding. Dr. Rodriguez seemed increasingly obsessed with the manuscript, her eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. Victor, on the other hand, grew more and more agitated, his mutterings about evil and dark magic sending shivers down my spine. I tried to keep a level head, but it was getting harder by the minute. As night fell, we gathered around the table once more, this time with candles lit and incense burning. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of the lector's presence bearing down upon us. The darkness closed in around us as we made our way deeper into the cave. Our headlamps cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem like we were being followed by unseen presences. Dr. Rodriguez led the way, her voice steady and reassuring as she navigated through the narrow passages. Victor trailed behind, his eyes scanning the air with a mixture of fear and fascination. I brought up the rear, my heart pounding in my chest as I felt like I was walking into the abyss. The air grew colder and damper, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. We were getting close to something. I could feel it. Suddenly, Dr. Rodriguez stopped dead in her tracks, her head cocked to one side as if she was listening to a sound that only she could hear. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor shook his head, but I felt a shiver run down my spine as I listened intently. It sounded like echoes, footsteps, whispers, and distant laughter all blended together into a cacophony of sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. Dr. Rodriguez smiled, a look of excitement on her face. "This is it," she said, her voice full of awe. "The Cave of Echoes." As we stepped forward, the echoes grew louder, swirling around us like a vortex of sound. I felt myself being pulled towards the center, as if by some unseen force. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. The darkness was absolute, and I was left stumbling in the dark, desperate to find my way back to the others. But when I finally emerged from the cave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Rodriguez was gone, replaced by a figure in a long white coat, its face obscured by shadows. As I stumbled back into the cave, I called out for Dr. Rodriguez, but there was no response. Panic set in as I frantically searched the darkness, my heart racing with every snap of a twig or rustle of fabric. And then I saw it, a figure standing before me, its face still hidden behind the shadows. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I felt myself being drawn towards the figure as if by some unseen force. "Dr. Rodriguez," I called out again, my voice shaking with fear. But this time there was a response, a low, rasping whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome, investigator," it said. "I have been waiting for you." The figure stepped forward, its face still obscured by the shadows. But as it did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes were black as coal, and her skin was deathly pale. She spoke again, her voice dripping with malevolence. "You see, investigator, I have discovered a new language, one that speaks directly to the soul." The figure began to chant, its words echoing off the walls of the cave like a madman's incantation. I felt myself being drawn into the ritual as if by some dark and ancient power. And then suddenly it was over. Dr. Rodriguez collapsed to the ground, her eyes snapping back to normal as she gasped for breath. What did you do?" I stammered, my mind reeling with confusion. The figure turned to me, its face still hidden behind the shadows. "I taught you the language of the damned," it said, "and now you will be mine." As the darkness closed in around me, I realized that I was trapped in a living nightmare, and there was no escape. The darkness closed in around me like a shroud. I stumbled forward, desperate to find my way out of the cave, but every step felt like a betrayal, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow me whole. I tripped and fell, skinning my knee on the rough stone floor. As I sat up, wincing in pain, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes were black as coal once more, and she was staring at me with an unspeakable hunger. "You should not have come here," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Now you will never leave." I scrambled to my feet, panic driving me forward. But as I stumbled through the darkness, I realized that I was lost, trapped in a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns with no way out. And then I heard it, the sound of running water, growing louder with every step. It was coming from up ahead, and I could feel its icy breath on the back of my neck. As I rounded the next corner, I saw it, a vast underground lake, its surface glinting like diamonds in the faint light. And then I saw her, a figure standing on the far side of the water, beckoning to me with a bony finger. It was Dr. Rodriguez, but she was no longer alone. Victor stood beside her, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. "Welcome to our world," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You'll never leave." As I stood on the lake's edge, the water lapping at my toes, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. Victor and Dr. Rodriguez glided across the surface, their eyes fixed on mine with an unnerving intensity. The air was heavy with tension, and I knew that I was being drawn into a trap, but it was too late to turn back now. With a gentle nudge, they pushed me forward, and I stumbled onto the boat that waited for me. Victor took his seat beside me, Dr. Rodriguez at the helm. As we began to row, the darkness seemed to close in around us like a living entity. The stars above twinkled with malevolent glee, and I felt myself being pulled down into the abyss. The water was icy cold, numbing my skin as we glided deeper into the depths. Every stroke of the oars seemed to take me further from the world I knew. And then I saw it, a vast underwater city, its towers and spires reaching up towards us like skeletal fingers. Dr. Rodriguez's laughter echoed through the water, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome to our home," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "You'll never leave." As we approached the city gates, I felt myself being drawn into a world of madness and terror. The creatures that lurked in the shadows seemed to come alive, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. Victor's hand closed around my wrist, his grip like a vice. "Come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me show you our secrets." And then everything went black. As I stood before the portal, the lights from above sea Meadow converge onto it, illuminating its surface like a beacon of truth. The air was charged with an electric anticipation, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut through the silence, her words dripping with reverence. "Behold the portal to the underworld." As she spoke, the air around us seemed to ripple and distort, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone. The portal itself was in swirling vortex of colors, its edges pulsating with an otherworldly energy. I felt myself being drawn towards it as if by an unseen force. Victor stood beside me, his eyes fixed on the portal with an unnerving intensity. "Are you ready to see what lies beyond?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, but then something inside me snapped. I took a step forward and then another until I stood before the portal's threshold. Dr. Rodriguez reached out and touched my shoulder, her eyes gleaming with a knowing light. "Then let us begin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As we stepped through the portal, the world around us dissolved into chaos. Colors swirled together in a mad dance, and the air was filled with an ear-splitting cacophony of sound. I felt myself being torn apart and put back together again, my very soul ripped from its moorings. And when the chaos finally subsided, I found myself standing in a realm unlike any I had ever known. I stood at the edge of a vast, empty plain, the sky above me a deep, burning crimson. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel the weight of the underworld bearing down upon me. Dr. Rodriguez walked beside me, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "We are close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The gates of the underworld await." As we spoke, the plain began to shift and writhe around us like a living thing. The sky above grew darker as if night was falling prematurely. And then I saw it, a massive stone gate, its surface etched with ancient symbols of power and decay. Dr. Rodriguez reached out and touched the gate's central pillar, and the air around us seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "The gates are open," she said, her voice full of reverence. "Let us pass." As we stepped through the gates, I felt a sense of weight lifting from my shoulders. We were finally free from the prison of the world above. But as we walked deeper into the underworld, I realized that we were not alone. Shadows moved around us, dark and formless creatures that seemed to be watching our every move. Dr. Rodriguez did not seem to notice them, but I could sense her unease. "What is this place?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on some unseen terror. And then I saw it, a vast, crystal palace at the heart of the underworld. Its surface glinted with an inner light, and I could feel its power calling to me. Dr. Rodriguez reached out and touched the palace door, and it swung open with a sound like thunder. I stepped across the threshold of the crystal palace, and everything around me began to unravel. The walls seemed to melt away, revealing a vast, echoing chamber filled with mirrors that reflected every possible version of myself. Dr. Rodriguez's laughter echoed through the space, growing louder and more maniacal with each passing moment. "You see, investigator," she said, her eyes gleaming with madness, "this is where the true power of the underworld lies." As I watched in horror, the mirrors began to shatter, one by one, revealing fragments of my own psyche. I saw myself as a child, laughing and playing with my parents; as a teenager, angry and alienated from the world; as an adult, successful but empty and alone. The visions were disjointed and fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. And yet I felt a sense of recognition, as if each image was a piece of myself that I had long forgotten. Dr. Rodriguez reached out and touched my forehead, her fingers cold and unforgiving. "You are not who you think you are," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You are something far more sinister." As she spoke, the visions grew more intense, more disturbing. I saw myself as a monster preying on the innocent, as a god ruling over a kingdom of darkness and despair. The images were so real, so visceral, that I felt my own sanity begin to unravel. I stumbled backwards, away from Dr. Rodriguez's grasp, but she was too quick. She caught me by the arm, her grip like a vice. "Come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let us continue our journey." As we descended deeper into the palace, the visions grew more and more intense. I felt my own identity fragmenting, splintering into 1,000 different pieces. And yet, I knew that I was not alone. There were others down here, others who had descended into madness along with me. I could feel their presence, a collective heartbeat of insanity that echoed through the corridors of the palace. I stumbled through the winding corridors of the palace, Dr. Rodriguez's grip on my arm like a vice. The visions were still swirling in my mind, but they seemed to be fading, receding into the distance like a bad dream. We reached a large, circular room at the heart of the palace, and I felt a sense of trepidation as we entered. The room was filled with nothingness, no walls, no floor, no ceiling. Just an endless expanse of empty space that seemed to stretch on forever. Dr. Rodriguez led me to the center of the room, where a single chair waited for me. She sat down beside it, her eyes fixed on mine with an unnerving intensity. "This is the heart of the underworld," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here, you will find the truth about yourself." I felt a sense of dread creeping over me as I approached the chair. Something was waiting for me there, something that would change everything. Dr. Rodriguez reached out and took my hand, leading me to sit down in the chair. As soon as I did, the room fell silent, not just the sound, but the very presence of it. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the space, leaving only an eternal, crushing quiet that seemed to press down on me from all sides. And then I heard a voice, a low, rumbling voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Welcome," it said. "We have been waiting for you." The voice was like nothing I had ever heard before. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been twisted and distorted into something new and alien. I felt my mind reeling, struggling to comprehend what was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black.